Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you, Dr. Rubin. Did you have a good weekend?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah? It's all right, it's all right. It's never long enough, is it? Morning,
You just have to go to his Instagram to see how much he enjoys his weekends.
Is that so? Good morning, Rufai. How you doing?
Morning.
Alrighty, let me tell you all what is happening around the world. Well, it is a somber day for journalists around the world, as a prominent Al Jazeera journalist who had previously been threatened by Israel has been killed, along with 4 other colleagues in an Israeli airstrike. Now, correspondent Anas Al-Sharif was one of Al Jazeera's most recognizable faces. Reporter Mohammed Al-Rejeh, plus cameramen Ibrahim Zahir and Mohammed Nufai, as well as Mohamed Aliwa, were all in a tent for journalists at the hospital's main gate when it was targeted. Now, the Israeli Defense Forces did confirm that it had indeed struck Anas Al-Sharif, saying that he was pretending to be a journalist while actually serving as the head of a terrorist cell in Hamas, but did not mention any of the other journalists. Now, last month, the Al Jazeera Media Network, the United Nations, and the Committee to Protect Journalists issued separate statements calling for the protection of Al-Sharif. Now, the death of these journalists is especially significant, as throughout the war, Israel has not allowed international journalists into Gaza to report freely. As a result, many outlets rely on local reporters within Gaza for coverage. Now, Al-Sharif was 28 years old. He leaves behind a wife and 2 small children. His father was killed by an Israeli strike on the family home in Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza City back in December 2023. Now, at the time, Al-Sharif said that he would continue to report and refuse to leave northern Gaza. Well, continue to report he did. And unfortunately, he has met his end. Rest in peace to all of those journalists. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has demanded the homeless residents of Washington, D.C. leave or face eviction. Now, shortly after leaving the White House on Sunday to go to his golf club in Virginia, the US president took to Truth Social, where he wrote that the homeless have to move out immediately. We'll give you places to stay, but far from the Capitol. Now, the post came with 4 photographs likely taken from the president's motorcade during the journey from the White House to his golf course. Now, 2 of the images showed a total of 10 tents pitched on the grass just over a mile from the White House. The 3rd image showed a single person sleeping on the steps of the American Institute of Pharmacy building on Constitution Avenue. And the 4th image showed the line of vehicles in the president's convoy passing a small amount of roadside litter. Now, Trump's complaints do follow an effort to federalize law enforcement in D.C., which he says is struggling with a homelessness epidemic and an upturn in crime. The data shows violent crime in Washington, D.C. in 2024 was down 35% from 2023 and was at the lowest level in over 30 years. So is this an example of a president annoyed by the eyesore of homelessness a little too close to home? That is the question. Those are your stories. I'd love to hear your thoughts before we move on to the papers.
But I'm not surprised Israel killed Al-Nassif, the journalist, because Israel, one of their favorite pastime is killing journalists for fun of it. Have they told us why they killed Shireen Abdul Khalim, the female journalist?
Yes.
Yeah? Did they tell us why? In fact, October 7th had not even happened when they killed Shireen, because it was just a case of a raid going on by some IDF forces, and Shireen was there covering it. But, they just looked at it and said, let's kill her. And do you know how Israel decided to do this? At first, they incited the public against this journalist and baited him for telling his story and say he was a member of a Hamas cell. And now, you know what they're doing? They're putting out some pictures to be able to show that he was a member of an Hamas cell, which they know is not true. The same Israel. While Netanyahu goes ahead to tell the world, in fact, he's going to enter Gaza anytime soon. In fact, he's been there already to continue the level of destruction. So all of this is happening, and the world is just looking, which is very sad. See, I think it was in 2018, if my memory serves me right, when the world celebrated 100 years of the First World War. And there were many world leaders that sat down, including Donald Trump at Arc de Triomphe. We had Donald Trump, we had Vladimir Putin and all of that. And they relieved the moments of the war. It was a very somber event. In fact, Angela Kidjo, the Beninois singer, sang Bleu. Bleu means gentle in the Ewe language. It was a song made popular by Bella Bello that died at a very young age, the age of 28. And the song is like a song that precedes the dead and say, go home gently. And we'll have thought that those world leaders learned anything from that 100 years anniversary of the First World War. But guess what? Just 4 or 5 years after, Trump is overseeing another mass killing that is bigger than the proportion that happened in Auschwitz during the Second World War against the Jewish people. Vladimir Putin is also overseeing another mass killing. And guess what? Trump encourages these mass killers because he's going to be meeting with Putin in Alaska. And the major people that are being hurt, the Ukrainians, are not going to be there. He's not going to have any Ukraine representative. So you can see the way of the world and the hypocrisy of the world. Yeah. And that's just also what extends with Trump. You came in on a mandate. You will protect the very poor, but you can't stand them because you just saw them camping. You think if they had homes, they would not stay in their homes? Yes. You think they love to be there in the cold with the uncertainty, but you say, go get them out because you are the powerful man.
That's what he said.
Okay.
All right, well, let's start with Washington, D.C., where many feel that this was prompted by the attack that happened on Edward Corristine, the former White House staffer, a couple of weeks ago. He used to work for Doge, and he was with a lady. I've seen two different accounts. However, in essence, there was a lady who was getting carjacked by a bunch of juveniles, and he tried to rescue her, and in the process was also injured quite seriously, and I believe there was a robbery as well that took place at that stage. So many people are saying this is probably the thing that prompted him. He'd been muting the idea for a while, but this is what then pushed him to say, you know what, the crime rate in Washington, D.C. is out of control. Statistically, crime in Washington, D.C. has reduced since the COVID period, where it spiked quite drastically. But the Trump administration are saying that it has reduced, but he's not happy with how, with the current crime statistics. I believe the Washington, D.C., is it the governor or the mayor, the Democratic, it should be the Democratic mayor, said that crime in Washington, D.C. is at a 30-year low. So there's a conflict there, absolutely. But in the meantime, he says he's bringing out the National Guards yet again. This will be the second time in this administration that he brings out the National Guards. The last time Washington, D.C. was federalized by the National Guards was in 1968 during the Martin Luther riots. So this is quite an unprecedented move. So there's concern all around that. Is it about homeless people? Is it about crime? Is it more of a drive towards gentrification? And that in itself has been a major challenge, not just in Washington, D.C., but in major cities all around the world, where cities are saying that, well, we want to do urban renewal or, well, in essence, gentrification. We need to get rid of poor people and make everywhere look presentable. That is a debate on its own. Very quickly to Anas al-Sharif. It's extremely tragic. Now, we don't know whether or not he truly worked for Hamas. Israel Defense Forces claim that he was a head of a cell for Hamas. They claim that they found training rosters, names of Hamas members operating in his area, and we already know that the media at the moment is having to use whoever's on the ground to access stories from Gaza. So Al Jazeera, of course, have distanced themselves for it, but it is not impossible that this gentleman was working for Hamas and saw an opportunity to also work for Al Jazeera to get his message out there. What am I saying is that as journalists, I think we also have to be very careful, because the line between journalism and activism is becoming thinner by the day. It's becoming slimmer by the day. However, it should never, ever, ever be crossed. And that's because activism in itself stands for a position that is not necessarily always the public good, or not necessarily the truth or fair or so forth, because you can have negative activism as much as you have positive activism. So I think this is, for me, just important for media companies to ensure that they vet their people, especially the correspondents they have in these volatile areas.
Okay, what are the key issues in the attack on the journalists of Al Jazeera staying in a tent of the Shifa hospital in Gaza?
Yes.
the first issue. President Benjamin Netanyahu has made it very clear that the only way to secure peace in the Gaza Strip is to take over the entire Gaza Strip, complete occupation, expansion of occupation in the Gaza Strip. And this is in the context of that. The United Nations Security Council has met to say that this is unacceptable, this is inhuman, this is against international law. Many countries condemned Israel's expansionist ambitions. The only country that opposed it was the United States. And the United States was saying maybe Hamas should be blamed. That is the background, the context. Now, we have this attack on 5 journalists from Al Jazeera. At the end of the day, the death toll is put at 7. But in total, the Israeli Defense Forces have killed up to 10 Al Jazeera journalists since the hostilities began in 2023. In October, Israel targeted Anas al-Sharif and said that, look, he's a terrorist, which, the analysts have said, that was a prelude to murder. That was like serving notice. In fact, the Committee for the to protect journalists based in New York said so at that time, October last year, also said so last month, that Israel is trying to assassinate journalists. Now, what Israel had done was to expel Al Jazeera journalists from the Gaza Strip. They broadcast from Jordan, relying on local journalists. So Anas al-Sharif is the lead of the team who are local, journalists. And now they went after them. It's murder, simplicity. Israel has committed murder because journalists are considered civilians within the province of international law. A journalist is not a target, as the Committee to Protect Journalists has said. But they have made journalists targets, and they've killed 5 additional. Now, in total, the CPJ, Committee to Protect Journalists, says at least 186 journalists have been killed, about 153,000 plus civilians have been wounded. Now, in all of this, 90 journalists have lost their lives in the course of this conflict. The media office of Gaza, of Hamas, says that, in fact, about 230 journalists have been killed. What does this point to? The third point I would like to make is about the hazard that journalists face. Journalists report the truth. But we live in a world where truth is not allowed, where Israel, Netanyahu, say that they don't want the truth about the situation. Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war, which is the major challenge here. And Anas al-Sharif, the lead team of the Al Jazeera media group, has been reporting about this starvation. And that caught on with the Arab world. And that's why they have eliminated him. But the US says, well, it's Hamas that is a problem. Now, Netanyahu and his team, they've not been able to provide concrete proof. They say these journalists were terrorists, but they have no proof. Now, to go quickly to New York, to Washington, D.C. Now, the law in the United States recognizes Washington, D.C. as a district. It's not a state, which means that the federal government can take over parts of the municipal laws and all of that. But there are also limits, and that's the point that the mayor of Washington, D.C. is making. That the situation with the homeless people does not warrant the intervention of park police, of FBI, of almost every law enforcement officer from the federal agency. 450 federal officers were deployed to Washington, D.C. yesterday to enforce President Trump's order that homeless people should move out. The population of Washington, D.C. is 700,000. The population of the homeless people there is 3,753. On any day, the mayor tells us you will find maybe about 800 people on the streets. So I agree with you that this is about gentrification. This is also about Trump playing his own politics, because the mayor of Washington, D.C. is Democratic. He is a Republican president.
Correct.
He wants to federalize security. He says he's fighting crime, when it is even established that the crime rate has gone down significantly
Correct.
below the 2023 figures in Washington, D.C. So this is Trump being Trump again. He's totalitarian, whether in the U.S. or abroad.
Well, thank you all for your wonderful submissions, as always. Let's take a look at some newspapers. Let's start with This Day. Now, This Day reports that the Rural Electrification Agency has signed an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with federal government agencies to launch a 100 billion naira initiative to power public institutions with solar energy. There's also news of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky winning the backing of the EU and NATO to be involved in the peace meeting between the US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska this Friday. The New Telegraph leads with the legal and moral arguments over capital punishment and whether or not judges should be given the power to sign the death warrants of convicts who have been sentenced to death. Currently, that power is with state governors, but as the article says, governors don't sign these warrants in a timely manner, if at all. They also don't hastily commute death sentences to life imprisonment, which would allow convicts to be sent to prisons in rural areas and decongest prisons in urban cities, where there are huge overcrowding issues. Now, the Daily Independent does have a report on the management of the Olusegun Obasanjo Presidential Library, having threatened legal action against the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, the EFCC, over its raid on the Presidential Library on Sunday. Now, the EFCC arrested 93 youths and seized 18 vehicles as well as mobile phones during this operation, which began at 2 a.m. that morning. Now, the Punch's picture headline shows the 93 youths who were arrested for internet fraud in those early hours over in Abeokuta. There's also news, if we take a look at the Punch, which shows these youths, there's also news that states collectively spent about 235.5 billion naira on servicing external debt obligations in the first half of 2025. Let's move on to The Guardian, and The Guardian leads with high net worth individuals and businesses fleeing congestion and asset depreciation as they flock to Echo Atlantic, where a plot of land has gone from being valued at 180 million naira in the early 2000s to now being worth more than 2 billion naira.
Juicy.
Which ranks as Nigeria's third priciest neighborhood after Old Ikoyi and Banana Island. Now, politics leads the Daily Sun as it reports of opposing factions within the PDP backing either former President Goodluck Jonathan or Peter Obi. The article does name a faction led by Bauchi State Governor Bala Mohammed as the force backing Jonathan, while younger members of the party are reportedly throwing their weight behind Obi. Now, it's this uncertainty that contributes to the headline on today's Inquirer, which has the former vice president, Atiku Abubakar, and Peter Obi weighing the options as they delay formal membership of the African Democratic Congress. The leadership has the federal government issuing flood warnings for the 10th to 14th of August across 15 northern states, including Zamfara, Sokoto, Borno, and Kwara. Finally, the Daily Trust leads with the residents in the Babanla and neighboring communities in Kwara State fleeing over the terrorist attacks taking place. That's as the federal government deploys fighter jets to chase the terrorists away.
Okay, so when the government keeps saying we've done a lot to reduce insecurity, and you are hearing places like Kwara that were not in the throes of the attack again, fighter jets coming as much as North Central like Kwara, then you are asking what is going on in the country? Because the NSA is so quick to say we are doing a lot.
All right. I wish we had more time to get into that. Thank you so much, Edefemi.